Hello YouTubers, and welcome to this review of the Cannondale Scalpel 1. Now this happens to be a 26-inch scalpel, which in this year of 2013 is a little dated because obviously most bikes being sold at the moment are 29-inch. Now in this review what I'm going to do, I'm going to give you a walk around the bike and explain why I've chosen this bike in particular to review and to ride. I haven't ridden it yet. It's literally brand new. I've spent the last 3 hours just setting it up ready for a ride tomorrow. I'm going to take it onto the mountain, in fact onto Table Mountain, on a route that I've been riding for more than 15 years. So from that perspective I should have a fairly good understanding of how well this bike performs or not. Just to give you a bit of background in terms of where I come from in terms of my riding experience, I've probably been riding for the last 15 to 18 years, mountain biking. Mountain biking is my first passion. I do road biking. I actually get better results on the road when I compete, but my first passion is mountain biking. Now, I come from, my bike prior to this is a Morwood Zula, which is a single pivot bike, actually produced locally in South Africa, but they sell, their main market is overseas. I've also had a Titus Motorlight, prior to that a Santa Cruz Superlight, that is my most favorite bike to date, a Trek VRX 300, and before that some hardtail chromoly bikes. So I've got a little experience on full suspension bikes, and this should give me a really good understanding as to how well this does work. Now, why did I choose this bike? Obviously most cyclists are looking for the lightest bike they can, and when this bike was produced it was one of the lightest production bikes you could get. There is one version lighter than this. It's called the Cannondale Scalpel Ultimate, and that weighed in without pedals at around 8.4 kilograms. This one weighs in at 9 kilograms without pedals. As it's configured here, it's got Look Quartz pedals, it's got bar ends, and obviously the K bottle cage on there, and it weighs in at just shy of 9.7 kilograms. So it certainly is a nice weight, and on the ride that I'm going to do tomorrow I'll be riding with two other guys who, one's got a specialized carbon bike that weighs around 10.8, 11 kilograms. The other gent normally rides a Merida which weighs 10.4, but his bike is in the bike shop, so he's going to be riding a 29-inch, quite a heavy 29-inch bike. But we've all got Look Quartz pedals so that we can interchange across the bikes to get a good understanding of how the bikes perform climbing, going downhill, going down on rough stuff. And ultimately the question we do want to answer as we progress and ride different bikes is understand, is the 29-inch wheel all hype? How does a 26-inch compare to 29? And is the 650B or the 27.5-inch wheel a good compromise? But anyway, let's have a closer look at this bike so we can have a good understanding of how it's put together. Right, so obviously the first thing to note about the bike, which is unusual about the Cannondale Scalpels, and this is something that Cannondale pioneered, was the Lefty Forks. As opposed to, let's say, a normal Fox front fork or other forks where you've got two stanchions going down, you've got the single stanchion on the left. This one happens to be partly fiberglass. Their rationale for doing this obviously is that you've got one less stanchion, thus it's a weight saving. They say, and apparently it is stiffer than having two stanchions. So even though you're giving up an extra stanchion, which in theory should provide you extra stiffness, they say this does the same, and that in theory does give you the weight saving. The other big point which gives you weight saving on this bike is on the rear suspension. So as you'll note, you can see it's got a Fox RP23 rear shock. It's an air shock, but the one unusual thing about this bike, it's what it's called, it's got the zero pivot system. There is no pivot point or bushing or bearing at the back of the bike. They use the carbon itself to flex up and down as the pivot, and thus again saving weight. This does mean they reduce the pivot on here, because most bikes in this class would have about 100 mm travel in the back. This only has 80. It does have a full 100 in the front fork. So I'm certainly intrigued. As I said, I I really like my single pivot bikes, and this configuration certainly is different to that, so I'm very intrigued to see how well that's going to work. Does this configuration with the weight saving make up for what I'm used to in the kind of travel 100mm travel bikes that I'm normally riding? It does then have the Mavic Crossmax wheels. They are tubeless ready. I swear by these wheels. I really like them. I've had them on most of my bikes. These ones, however, as it comes from the factory, are set up with a tubeless ready tire, but they do have tubes in them. So that is something that I'm going to have to be wary of. I'm used to riding probably 1.8 bar in the back and about 1.6 in the front. I'm roughly set, I've got the setup for that, but that may be too low. I may end up with pinch flats if I'm not careful on my ride tomorrow. The other thing is that I also have grown, and I love the Maxxis Lust tubeless tires. I find them very forgiving. If you lose the front, if you lose traction, your front starts sliding, you can often catch it. Whereas most other tire types that I've ridden, if you lose traction in the front, that's it, you're down. So I'm intrigued to see how these are going to work and how my confidence is going to feel going down on the loose stuff on these tires. Right then, you'll have to excuse the giant slap sock, but that was the one that was at my local bike shop that kind of fitted. But as you can see, the rear derailleur and the drivetrain is XTR, barring the crank. So the front derailleur is XTR. Note, only 2 blades. It's 10 gears at the back, 2 at the front as opposed to 3. Again, another weight saving idea. It's got the FSA, or full speed ahead, SLK crank. Now, I'm also one for believing that one should try and keep all your drivetrain componentry to the same make. I have invariably with other people's bikes in the past seen once you start mixing different brands that some things don't mesh together. But so far in my testing and the setup of this bike, it seems to work fine. But ultimately on the mountain tomorrow, I'll get the answers to that. For the braking, it's got the Magura Mata SL brakes. Many years ago, I think my first disc brakes that I ever had were by Magura, and this is a return to them. My previous setup, I had XTR disc brakes, so I'm intrigued to see how well they work. Again, during setup, they seem to be working fine. They're bedding in, but ultimately on the mountain, once we've done a few fast down descents, they should bed in, and we'll see how effective the actual braking is. Just to note, if you were a real weight weenie, then the bar ends that I've got on, the 2 of them weigh 125 grams together. So if you were to take these off, perhaps go for a carbon seat post and perhaps a lighter set of pedals, you could probably get this down to, I'd say, 9.2, 9.3 kilograms ready to ride. Whether you want to do that, I think you always need to be careful when you start trying to lose too much weight on your pedals. You want a pedal that a cleat and pedal that you're comfortable with, because not being able to cleat in or struggling with your pedals means you're potentially going to lose time, which doesn't of course help. I have also in the past experimented with various carbon seat posts, and some of them are good, but sometimes you can come unstuck. Particularly the bars. This does have a carbon bar on the front, and you have to be particularly careful when you're tightening your bar ends. I do have a torque wrench to make sure that I don't over tighten or torque the ends to split the carbon. And of course, the one other unusual feature of this bike, because it's got the Lefty Fork, is that it's got the front wheel from Mavic is very specifically made for a lefty, because it's obviously only comes through on the one side. It's obviously got a nice stiff through axle, but it doesn't have a quick release. So I discovered that's potentially a bit of a challenge, because I transport my bikes inside a car. So obviously getting the front wheel on and off is now a bit of a problem. And presumably if you do have a flat while you're out riding, you're either going to have to carry an Allen key to remove it if you want an easy change, or somehow try and do it while it's on the bike itself. Right, and in terms of the other equipment, it's got XTR rapid fire shifters. These are again something different to what I was riding before. I had a very old style XTR where the shifters were incorporated in the brake levers like an SDI brake changer, and that worked really well. I also had a reverse sprung rear derailleur, so that when you were coming up you wanted an easier gear. It's sprung up into the easier gear, which is great for racing, as opposed to having to push hard to get your easier gear if you suddenly were reaching a climb and you hadn't catered for that. Then also on the bike you can adjust your rebound by turning this red aluminium top here. Also it's got a lockout, so if you push the center button there, you hear it flops out. That locks the front for when you're climbing or you want the front stiff so that you're not losing energy. You push it down and then it frees the front to move up. I'll just quickly get next to the bike so you can get an idea of the suspension on the front and the back. Right, so just to give you an indication of the suspension in the front. That is the 100mm of travel. It's got an air point in the bottom of the fork to actually put the pressure in, and as I said, the rebound adjustment is on the top, the rebound and the lockout. Right, and this may be difficult to see in the camera, but here we go. So as you can see, all the flex is happening on the bottom of the triangle over here and being transferred up here to the rear shock. Right, so I hope you found that useful. Ultimately, I'm hoping to have a camera with me when I ride it on the mountain, so you can get an interesting understanding of when we switch bikes between my mates, so we can get an understanding of whether this does actually make a difference on the climbs and then on the descents to see how well it handles. Anyway, if you do enjoy these kind of reviews, certainly please give us a thumbs up, and I'll catch you soon for the next video. Cheers.